Hi, I'm Cautex, and shortly after the announcement of merciless bonegrinder being buffed by 100% in patch 9.1.5, a viewer named Slythion reached out to me because they were trying to calculate how big they could get a single whirlwind to hit for. They had gotten stuck on how to proceed with their calculations because they weren't sure about some of the formulas, and at which point they basically said, "Hey, I thought this might make an interesting video, here's my math." And honestly, they did about 80% of the heavy lifting on this one, so a massive shout out to them for making my life mostly easy. So let's see if we can calculate how big of a whirlwind we could get. Now, whenever you want to do this sort of math, step one is obviously being able to calculate the damage of whirlwind itself. So how do you do that? Well, you go to Wowhead and you pull up the page for whirlwind, and then you'll see that it does 3 hits for 18.2% of attack power. Okay, so what's our attack power? Well, back in BFA, attack power was changed to be equal to your strength plus your weapon DPS times 6. So for me, in some gear that has no random proc effects, I had 1646 strength, and I was using an item level 216 weapon that did 55.7 DPS. So this would mean that I would have 1798 attack power, and then from there, we can just take that and plug it into our damage formula. And we should be good to go. Unfortunately for me, though, this is the part where I just lost my mind for a while because there was an 8.9% discrepancy between my in-game tooltip damage and my calculated damage. And I still have no idea the actual source of this discrepancy. Now, if you want to see what me losing my mind over this looks like, there's an unlisted video in the description where I explain everything that I did to try and make sense of what the heck was going on here. Right now, my least stupid hypothesis is that the Arms Warrior specialization spell that gets modified whenever Blizzard wants to apply blanket buffs to things is applying to Whirlwind. This is despite the fact that Whirlwind is not listed in the tooltip on Wowhead, though regardless, what I did was I just ended up adjusting my original formula so that it would properly match the in-game tooltip. So, okay, we have a damage formula for Whirlwind, and after that bit of futzing, it was lining up with the tooltip values at varying levels of strength and weapon DPS amounts. So, now that we've got that groundwork done, let's start trying to figure out how big we can make a Whirlwind get in patch 9.1.5. In my current gear, I have 1584 strength, and I have a 252 weapon that does 77.9 DPS. On top of that, we can get 20 strength from a Feast of Gluttonous Hedonism, 70 from a Flask, 190 from a Strength Pot, 900 from a Max Rank Chaos Bane, and if we empower a 252 Adaptive Armor Fragment, that can give us 4% more strength whenever we've been healed. This puts us at 2,871 strength, and with my weapon DPS, that means that we would have 3359 attack power if you had a Sharpening Stone. So before accounting for any of the other stats, at this point, Whirlwind would have a tooltip damage of 1956, which would have each hit doing 652 damage. Now we need to start accounting for all of the sources of other damage modifiers. So on my gear, I have 6.23% versatility, so when you account for that, it brings it up to 2078 damage. Now, because of how Battle Shout actually functioned, it's basically just another 5% damage modifier, and so that brings it up to 2182 damage. The Monk debuff gives us another 5%, and then we can get another 1.5% from 3 stacks of the max rank Unholy Domination Shard, 3% from the Frost Shard if we are able to hit a new mob recently, and then 3% if we're hitting a mob under 50% health. This gets us up to just under 2500 damage, but now it's time for the big stuff. Assuming we have deep wounds on the target, with my gear, that provides an extra 25.21% damage increase, which now puts the Whirlwind at just under 3100. Avatar increases its damage by 20%, Colossus Smash is another 30%. As of right now on live servers, an empowered 252 Merciless Bonegrinder would provide 100% increased Whirlwind damage after using Bladestorm, but in patch 9.1.5, that's going to be doubled to 200%. Now, it is important to remember that a 100% damage increase means that the damage is doubled, and by extension, a 200% damage increase is actually tripling the damage. So once we account for all of these things, that brings our Whirlwind's tooltip damage to 14,458. Next, collateral damage increases your Whirlwind's damage by 25% for each single target ability that you use during Sweeping Strikes. Sweeping Strikes last 15 seconds, and I currently have 17.36% haste, which would give me 11 stacks of collateral damage. However, if I had Lust, I could squeeze out another 4 global cooldowns, bringing me up to 15 stacks. This is the number of stacks that I chose to calculate with, though if you had 100% haste and reached the minimum GCD cap of 0.75 seconds, it would be possible to reach 20 stacks of collateral damage. Anyway, with 15 stacks, we get 375% increased damage, which is nearly quintupling our damage, and then brings it up to 68,678. Now, because all of these damage modifiers are multiplicative, the specific order that we do things in doesn't really matter. So this is when I chose to account for the target's armor. Now, I assumed that the target would be a boss, and so I did the full armor calculation with that in mind, which basically amounts to a 30% damage reduction, though not quite because the armor formula is a convoluted mess. Anyway, this brings our damage down to 48,080 damage. We're definitely not done yet, but at this point we reach a fork in the road and we have to make some decisions about how to proceed. We need to pick a legendary, we need to pick a covenant, and we also have to deal with crit. And unfortunately for me, all of these things are somewhat interlinked, because, for example, if you go Kyrian, you can use Elysian Might, which means that you're going to get an extra 25% critical strike damage. Instead of analyzing every possible combination of covenants and legendaries, I only looked at a couple that I thought had potential to be really good. And specifically, I looked at Necrolord Soulbound with Emony, because doing this gives you access to the Veteran's Repute Conduit, which, if empowered at item level 252, gives you 20% increased strength during banner, and that's on top of the 400 mastery that it gives, which would equate to 12.5% extra damage. Emony also can give up to another 10% strength if you have 4 party members nearby when you use your banner. I also looked at Kyrian Soulbound with Pelagos, and I did this because it gives you access to using Elysian Might for the 25% increased critical strike damage, Combat Meditation, and Better Together, which would give a combined total of 355 mastery, which would equate to 11.45% increased damage, and then also Newfound Resolve, which gives 10% strength. Finally, I also looked at Nightphase Soulbound with Karain. Going Karain gives you access to First Strike for 25% chance to crit, and it also gives you access to a 10% damage modifier if the target is above 75% health. This unfortunately also means that you're going to have to lose out on the 3% from the Blood Shard. There's also a 5% damage buff that you can get against similarly named targets after doing damage to a target below 35%, but I did not account for this because even though it's technically possible to get both damage modifiers on a single target, the context needed to make that happen is so specific that it didn't really seem practical. This is also partly why I didn't look at Naya, as even if you get the max benefit from the capstone trait, that's only going to give you 450 mastery and, well, nothing else, which was clearly not going to be better than going Necrolord or Kyrian. So once I branched these calculations out to account for all of these covenant-specific mastery and strength buffs, it was time to deal with crit. Now there was 2 possibilities for handling crit. We could create a weighted average, or we could just assume that every hit would be a crit and look at the absolute maximum possible damage that we could achieve. Now, because of the fact that Whirlwind strikes 3 times, each strike has an independent chance to crit. That makes getting all 3 to crit a drastically less common occurrence. So for example, with my current gear, I have 31.8% chance to crit. And even with that much crit, only 3.2% of Whirlwind casts would see all 3 strikes crit. Because of this, I went ahead and calculated the max possible damage, assuming that it was always going to crit. I also then calculated the weighted average damage that you could expect to see out of a Whirlwind. Generating this weighted average meant dealing with all of the possible combinations of hits and crits for each of the strikes, and then the frequency of that specific combination. For all 3 of the covenants, I assumed that you would be running Rend. This means that for Nightfate and Necrolord, the crit multiplier would be 2.1, and for Kyrian, the multiplier is 2.625. Now, both the Necrolord and Nightfate options did not rely on a Covenant-specific legendary, so that opens up the possibility of using Seismic Reverb, which makes Whirlwind do an extra strike for 80% damage if you hit 3 or more enemies. Now, at this point, I was feeling rather lazy, so rather than go back and account for all of the combinations of 4 strikes hitting and critting, or try to remember how to use Pascal's triangle correctly, I just went ahead and said that the value of that extra strike would be worth 1/3 of the current damage times 0.8. So after calculating that, for the max crit, and then the weighted average damage, we finally got some results that we can look at. The winner here was going Necrolord for both the highest max and the highest average damage. Kyrian with Elysian Might had the second highest max damage, and Nightfay had the second highest average damage. So, just how much damage would these Whirlwinds be doing? Well, you could expect that this Whirlwind would do an average of 115,085 damage to a single target, with it doing a maximum of 179,000 damage. Even if you got rid of Seismic Reverb to remove the need for there to be 3 targets present, you would still get an average Whirlwind of over 90,000 damage and a maximum of over 140,000 damage. Alright, so these numbers are obviously insane, but we're just blindly assuming that we're going to have all of these buffs and debuffs active at once. Is that even reasonably doable? Well, the first thing to look at is to see if we even have enough time to get all of these bonuses up simultaneously. So let's do that. It takes 15 seconds to build out collateral damage stacks, but then the buff lasts 30 seconds, so that's pretty reasonable. Colossus Smash lasts 10 seconds and applies Deep Wounds, which lasts 15. Potions last 25 seconds. Merciless Bonegrinder is the shortest buff that we have, and that lasts 9 seconds, and it also requires you to use Bladestorm first. However, you can just cancel the Bladestorm immediately to get the buff. Chaos Bane lasts 15 seconds. You also have to build up the stacks first, so getting this timed properly could be a little tricky, but it seems doable. Now, Banner lasts 15 seconds, and Lead by Example lasts 20 seconds, so it's definitely possible to line that up with Chaos Bane and all the other stuff. Avatar lasts 20 seconds, and Ren lasts 15. We also have to have hit a new mob within the last 20 seconds to ensure that the Frost Domination Shard is active, and then we also need to have hit our target at least 3 times to get our Unholy Shard stack up, which should be just fine considering that we're going to do that while applying all of our debuffs. So basically, once we've built our stack of collateral damage, we could probably do something along the lines of using our Potion, Avatar, and Rend, then use Colossus Smash, then Banner, then Bladestorm and cancel it, and then we could use Whirlwind. So yeah, it definitely seems like we have enough time to do everything. But that's not the only thing that we need to think about. We're also going to need to have 4 people in our group who are close enough by so that we can get the max benefit from Emony. We're going to need there to be 2 targets to build our collateral damage stacks, or we're going to need there to be 3 targets if we're using Seismic Reverb. We also need a monk to have hit the target to apply the physical damage bonus to that. We then need the target to be below 50% health for the 3% from the blood shard. As previously mentioned, we need to have hit a new target within the last 20 seconds. We also need lust during sweeping strikes. Finally, we need to have received a heal to proc adaptive armor fragment. The hardest part of all of this seems like it's going to be lining up Chaos Bane with everything. Second hardest part is probably going to be getting all of the domination shards activated, and adaptive armor fragment could be a little finicky in most cases because of its internal cooldown, but if you're specifically setting up this Whirlwind, it shouldn't cause too many problems, I don't think. So yeah, this actually seems totally doable to me. So what have we learned here? We've learned that in patch 9.1.5, we could be seeing some comically huge Whirlwinds. Now we just need that patch to go live and somebody to make it happen. There's a lot of possibilities for pushing this damage even higher, depending on the trinkets that you're using and also what stats you're itemizing for. Once patch 9.1.5 goes live, I think Rextroy is going to need to update his Whirlwind combo video, because 30k seems just a little low. In the meantime, as always, I encourage you to tell me why my opinions are dumb. I also know that there's almost certainly damage sources that I forgot to consider, and I probably made multiple mistakes along the way. So if you spot anything that I forgot or did wrong, tell me about it in the comments. You're always welcome to suggest ideas for future videos as well. And lastly, I just want to say thank you for watching this video, and subscribe for more.